To the left of the wall is a bola. A bola is a prehistoric weapon that was swung around the head of the Indian and would then be thrown at the game. The stones at the bottom would wrap around the animal's legs, bringing the game to its knees. In the bottom of the window is a stone scraper that was hafted on a handle in order to scrape hides. What makes this scraper interesting is that the stone was an ordinary spear point. Apparently it broke, and rather than discard it, the Indians reshaped it so that the women could use it as a scraper. In the center of the window is a post mold. A post mold is a discoloration in the soil that represents a scientific clue to archaeologists looking for artifacts. Indians used pits for many things. They used them for food storage, some of them being as deep as 12 feet. They used them for garbage or refuse pits. They used them for post holes to support the legs that held up their bark homes, and in the winter months when the ground was frozen, they would probably bury their dead in these pits. Archaeologists discovering a pit or post hole oftentimes meant that they had discovered a village site. To the right of that is a piece of bone or antler shaped on a handle so that it could be used to punch holes in the leather for making clothing. And to the right of this is a famous stone axe. The stone axe is not to be confused with a tomahawk. A tomahawk was a Delaware Indian word originally meaning tomahawkin or club. English changed the name to tomahawk meaning axe. Indians fought with clubs, not with axes. The stone axe was made by beating away at it with a very hard creek cobble called a hammerstone. It took about 55 hours at 114 pecks a minute to shape a stone axe. You can see if you look closely the many pock marks on the stone. The groove was made by rubbing river grass back and forth with wet sand. Obviously the axe is quite dull, so if the Indians wanted to fell a tree, what they would have to do is displayed under the little studio light on the left to the wall. First of all, the Indians would pack wet mud around the tree they were going to fell, about 3 or 4 feet above the ground. Then they would set fire to the trunk. As the wood began to char and burn, they would then take their stone axe and begin chopping the wood. Naturally, charcoal would be much softer to chop than green wood. The purpose of the mud was to keep the upper part of the tree from catching on fire. Please step into our bark house. Many Indians lived in teepees or tents made from animal skin. The reason is that their basic food supply was the buffalo, and they would have to follow the buffalo herds as they grazed on the prairie. In school, we know that children are taught to sit Indian style, and we all know that means sitting around the floor with your legs crossed. The reason that the Indians sat this way was not out of custom or tradition, but rather out of necessity, because smoke from their cooking fire would rise slowly through the hole in the ceiling, and there would be approximately a 2-foot layer of smoke present in the room. If the people stood in here, they'd probably choke, but if they all sat cross-legged beneath the smoke layer on these platforms, they could breathe. And you'll see a small miniature Indian village. This depicts life along the banks of the Delaware River for hundreds of years. These are bark houses or wigwams. From the outside in the front, you'll see a post mold or food storage pit. To the left of that, you'll see a beaming pole with leather being tanned in the sun. There's also a dugout canoe in process. Birch trees grew too small in the Poconos to make birch bark canoes, so the Indians would burn down and hollow out trees and use these trees or dugouts for travel. To the right of that in the field is some corn growing. What's interesting is that women did the gardening, not because they were subservient to the men, but because women discovered agriculture on a worldwide basis. As a matter of fact, they would grow the beans and the corn in the same field together. The bean would grow the corn stalks for support, thus eliminating the need for bean poles. And then they would grow squash in among the plants because squash had vine-like leaves which would discourage small animals and rabbits from getting into the garden. Stone or sand. At ground level, long skinny pieces of clay would be rolled out and looped into a circle and pinched where they overlapped. Coil upon coil would be built until the pot reached the size that the Indian wanted. At this point, a wet stick was used to smooth the outside of the wet clay, and the pottery would be dried in the sun. About 10 days later, a very hot fire would be built from oak, and all the pottery would be put under the hot coals of the fire. When the pottery turned white from heat, they would be removed and let cool. Then the Indians would hit the pottery with their finger, and if it had a ring to it, something like your everyday china, the pottery was tempered and would be used for cooking. If it made a dull thudding sound, the pottery was cracked and would probably be discarded. The small pot to the left in the front of the window is known as Milo cord pottery because the Indian woman used a stick wrapped in cord to smooth the outside of the wet clay. If you look closely, you can still see the impression of the cord made on the pot. That particular pot was found 4 miles from the museum and is approximately 1,000 years old.